But I just read this comment and I think I was alone. I wasn't reading this with Weronika. And it was something like, you guys should really watch The Fat Electrician. And I thought that they meant violence.
Hi everyone,
Hello.
this is Veronica,
And this is Waldemar.
and today we are watching the second part of Oversimplified Cold War.
Yep.
Yeah,
Okay, so
that's I think that's it. We really like the first part so far. Are we ready to crack on with the?
Alright, so I will just start.
This video was made possible by Skillshare, an online learning community where you can learn just about anything. Support my channel by signing up using the link below and get your first 2 months for free. For anyone who thinks recent US history has never been as crazy as it is right now, allow me to present to you the 1960s, extreme cultural division, major political assassinations, and the closest the world has ever come to nuclear apocalypse. Shocked by the CIA's intrusive methods for putting down socialism in Latin America, a certain Fidel Castro met with a certain Che Guevara in a bar in Mexico City, and the two of them decided they should grow some awesome beards and overthrow the Cuban government, which is exactly what they did. Cuba had been America's summer playground, and America...
Yeah, they showed a picture of a banana there. I think I told you once that I read this article about banana republics.
Yeah. With
Yeah.
Chiquita Bananas.
Yeah, it wasn't called Chiquita Bananas.
But this is
Back
a
then.
successor of those. But
Yeah, but the Chiquita is successor of one of those corporations. There was more. And the thing that they did to those countries to produce bananas, I mean, they also did some good things like infrastructure.
But it's always how you do it. You always build schools and you teach the kids
Yeah, but-
English in the
but
breaks
they really-
between work.
They drained those countries to zero. So if you ever will buy bananas, maybe try not to buy Chiquita
Are there
bananas.
any good bananas? They're like fair trade bananas? I think there are fair
Good
trade
bananas
bananas.
without human suffering on them.
I don't know. No, I think there are bananas with fair
Zero
trade stickers.
pesticides and zero human suffering. That's the best kind of bananas.
I really want a banana. Like a milkshake.
Oh, yes, it's so hot here.
It's 30 degrees in our apartment. So if we seem like we are in a heat coma, that's because we are in a heat coma. Okay, let's go on.
didn't like seeing a communist regime being set up in its own backyard, so the US immediately began training up Cuban exiles to invade Cuba and overthrow Castro. However, as the day of the operation came closer, Kennedy wanted to conceal any US involvement in the plan, so he massively scaled back American air support, and as a result, the Bay of Pigs invasion was a humiliating defeat for America. But Castro felt there was still an impending US threat to his regime. Meanwhile, in the Soviet Union, Khrushchev had a lot of medium-range nuclear missiles that couldn't reach America, but they could if they were positioned, say, on an exotic Caribbean island off the coast of Florida. Hey, I'm a communist who hates America. You're a communist who hates America. You know what that means? We should fall in love. I was just gonna suggest you set your missiles up in Cuba. Oh, no, you're right. That's a better idea. Beast.
I'm hesitant of sharing this, but this is funny enough that I think I can. I think I was in middle school, at the end of primary school or something, when we learned that at some point America wanted to bomb China. And because I am used to the European map, like with Europe in the center, I remember being very confused.
I know where this is going.
and I remember that I was kind of scared, and then I was like, okay, I know, because imagine I'm like 14 or something, and I'm, I have all this existential dread, and I'm just running, there's wars, and people want to kill each other, and I'm like, so they're gonna shoot the missiles over us. Yeah.
Who hates America. You know what that means? We should fall in love. I was just gonna suggest you set your missiles up in Cuba. Oh, no, you're right. That's a better idea. Be still, my beating heart. On October 14th, 1962, a U-2 spy plane over Cuba noticed something strange. Sir, you need to look at this photograph. You're right. That's the cutest dog I've ever seen. Sir, I was referring more to the Soviet missiles. America freaked out as they realized what was going on. They were completely vulnerable, and they had to act fast. They knew that airstrikes or an invasion of Cuba would likely mean nuclear war with the Soviet Union, so Kennedy came up with another idea. a blockade. The US Navy announced it would stop and search any Soviet ships heading to Cuba and would sink any that did not comply. In response, the Soviet put its military into full combat readiness. The US did the same and began drawing up plans for an attack on Cuba. Things were escalating fast, and both superpowers were getting ready for World War III. Emergency communications between the two sides broke down as Khrushchev rejected Kennedy's demands for the missiles to be removed. And for the first time in history, US Strategic Air Command moved to DEFCON 2. DEFCON 1 means nuclear war. The Soviets shot down a U-2 spy plane over Cuba. A Soviet nuclear submarine in the Caribbean mistakenly believed war had already broken out, and 2 of the senior officers gave the go-ahead to fire its nuclear torpedo. Thankfully, the 3rd senior officer, this beautiful man, refused to authorize the decision. The US finalized its preparations, and
Can you imagine having the knowledge that you are the person who prevented the war from annihilation? Yeah. Because it would be, I think, total annihilation of the whole world. And just one guy who said, you know what?
Maybe let's not do it.
Maybe let's not do it. And the 2 guys were, no, what's the problem? Let's go.
Yeah, we have a bunker, we're gonna be fine.
No, we are in the submarine, so we need to go.
I kid you, this beautiful man refused to authorize the decision. The US finalized its preparations, and I kid you not, the day before the US were set to decide the day and time for the Cuban invasion, Khrushchev was like, hey, you know if you just removed your missiles from Turkey, we'd remove ours from Cuba? Yeah, that sounds good to me. It was a bit more complicated than that, but at the last second, the 2 sides finally came to an agreement. Soviet missiles were shipped out of Cuba, and the world breathed one gigantic sigh of
See, but that's how they show it in this animation as well. If I watched it at 14, I would remain confused.
They should go other way around.
I also feel like I should clarify, at no point in my life did I think the Earth was flat, but it just didn't connect the dots in my head.
But on the different parts of the world, they have different kind of map, right?
Yeah,
for example,
that's why I said European.
If they live in Australia, they have Australia in the center.
I think so. At least I know that for Asia.
You have just one country, and all around there is a water, and then around it.
I have no idea about Australia. If anyone's from Australia, let us know. But it would have to be, I don't know. Also, the proportions on the map are wrong. So maybe for them, the Australia is the actual size that it should be.
Yeah, I guess so.
But then not in relation to the ocean, because the map would be pretty empty.
We will Google that after the episode.
Relief, except for one guy, who was bloody livid. Phew! Let's hope that's the biggest crisis of my presidency. Unfortunately for him, his presidency was to end with one. Having nearly blown up the planet, a few changes were made. First, the superpowers agreed to a limited test.
I'm sorry for pausing again. I didn't tell you that, but I read this on Reddit, I think, a couple of days ago, about the Kennedy assassination. Because there are a lot of theories about Kennedy assassination, but the guy who was convicted, I'm not sure he was convicted because he was shot soon, I think, after the trial or in the middle of the trial. I don't remember the details. Oswald was his name.
Yeah, but I don't know what happened.
He was an American, but the Soviet Union made this kind of a meeting. They called out everyone, all the organizations like KGB, all the secret intelligence. They have to come to this meeting, and they were checking out if they were the ones who killed Kennedy.
Checking how?
You're asking questions because you have so many different parts, so many different organizations that form the government.
Like investigate. Okay.
Yeah, because they were like, okay, someone shot the US president.
Can you please?
I didn't do it. Did you do it? No, I didn't do it. Okay, so did you do it? And be honest. I won't be angry, just...
If one of you admits, then all of you can have ice cream.
Yeah, I read that this went for a while, and it was like really all the top knot of all the Soviet intelligence agencies. Yeah.
Span treaty. Secondly, the Soviets ousted Khrushchev and replaced him with Leonid Brezhnev, who was a kisser. He liked to kiss. Both sides were deeply concerned at the prospect of nuclear war, but still, the arms race raged on throughout the 60s and 70s. US intelligence worked out that the Soviets' nuclear arsenal was not as powerful as they previously thought, but in fact, it was America that held the advantage. ABMs and MIRVs were developed, and the doctrine of MAD. If both sides knew they would be completely destroyed by a nuclear war, neither would risk starting one. But even without war, the world was already feeling the effects of nuclear weapons. In 1966, above the pleasant town of Palomares in Spain, a US bomber bomber collided with a tanker mid-air, and 4 hydrogen bombs fell and landed near the town below. It hasn't exploded, so I'm sure everything's fine. Whoa, boy. Hey, I wouldn't eat that if I were you. Okay. What were you gonna do today? Go for a swim? Yeah, I wouldn't. Are you breathing right now? Yeah? Yeah, I wouldn't. It took the Americans 2.5 months to find one of the bombs, which had gone missing in the ocean. This was the 14th time America had lost a nuclear bomb since 1950. Nobody knows how many bombs the Soviet Union lost. So sleep well tonight. After Kennedy's assassination, Vice President Lyndon B. Johnson took over, and he inherited...
No, actually, I'm thinking about this. There are not a lot of movies about this subject, and I think it's a pretty interesting one. Don't you think? And
About they lost...
nuclear bombs. Yeah, but like some kind of action movie or something where some terrorist organization put their hands on some nuclear bomb from the Cold War. I mean, I think it's kind of interesting, and I don't resemble any movies or any media about subject like that, idea like that.
No, me neither. I remember I listened to a podcast about like how to survive the nuclear apocalypse or something like that, and I think they said that Russia keeps continuously closing the bombs and the materials to make the bombs. Like, it's not only the bombs that they lost during that period, but also they keep having the materials stolen as well. But I think from what they said was that most of these bombs that they would be able to make are quite small bombs. Consolation as that is, but it's like to blow half a town, not...
Depends what town.
Depends what town, yeah. Not that it makes it any better.
After Kennedy, nobody knows how many bombs the Soviet Union lost. So sleep well tonight. After Kennedy's assassination, Vice President Lyndon B. Johnson took over, and he inherited a developing crisis in the East, Vietnam. Back in the 50s, the Vietnamese had kicked their French colonizers out once and for all, and the country was divided into two. In the north, a communist regime, and in the south, an anti-communist regime. Both were led by very sweet-looking old men, but don't let that deceive you. They were both ruthless dictators, and both dreamed of reuniting Vietnam under their own regime. So the north established the National Liberation Front, also known as the Viet Cong, to carry out a campaign of guerrilla warfare in the south with Soviet support. The US sent advisors to help train the South Vietnamese to deal with the threat, but President Diem's brutal policies pushed more and more South Vietnamese to support the Viet Cong, and over the next decade, the situation escalated to a breaking point. America feared the domino effect. That is, if South Vietnam fell to communism, would Cambodia be next? Then Laos? Thailand? Burma? India? LBJ had to make a choice between losing South Vietnam or sending in the troops, and so in they went. From 1965, America found itself in a war unlike anything it had ever fought before. Let's play Spot the Viet Cong Soldier. Did you see him? Of course not. That's because millions of young American men were drafted and sent to fight a ruthless enemy who used the thick jungle as its shield. It was nearly impossible to tell where the enemy was, or worse, who it was. And as a result, the civilian population got caught up in the brutal crossfire. The city of Saigon found itself under regular attack, and America launched a bombing campaign in the north during Operation Rolling Thunder. The Viet Cong used the Ho Chi Minh Trail running through Laos and Cambodia to supply the campaign. It was a long and brutal war, and I could never do it justice in this video. But in terms of the Cold War, Vietnam was probably the biggest of many, many global conflicts that signaled a turning point. Under the threat of nuclear war, the two superpowers began working to make their relationship more constructive, and as a result...
I think that for Europeans and for countries like USA and Russia now, but USSR back then, the Cold War, I mean, we don't kind of think of it as a war because we didn't send any military, we didn't have an armies going on our neighborhood, and we didn't die, or some of the people didn't die. But for those countries, especially in the Third World, the Cold War was very brutal. Yeah. You have those two superpowers who are afraid to fight against each other, so they use smaller countries, your territory, to fight with each other, and sometimes they're not even using their own people, but send people from your country to fight their war. And like they said,
the civilians getting caught in the crossfire as well.
Their ideological battle shifted away from the potential of direct conflict and more towards attempting to influence smaller proxy wars around the world.
Oh,
In
yeah.
the Middle East, the Soviet Union provided aid against Israel during the Six-Day War, and then again when the US backed Israel during the Yom Kippur War. In Africa, the Angolan Civil War saw US-supported South Africans fighting Soviet-supported Cubans. In the conflict between Somalia and Ethiopia, the superpowers interestingly switched sides as regimes changed, and the US continued fighting the spread of communism in its own backyard, funding the famous Contra groups to fight the socialist junta in Nicaragua. These proxy wars were fierce enough to begin with, but superpower intervention amplified the destruction and
Whereas a
created
lot-
alarming levels of human suffering throughout the Third World. And in Vietnam, that human suffering was all being broadcast back home via good old television. Going into the late 60s, America was a changing nation. This became this. This became this. And this became this. The new slogan that was taking root: make love, not war. The majority of Americans did not approve of Johnson's handling of the Vietnam War, and in 1968, a silent majority elected law and order candidate Richard Nixon. As the Vietnam War appeared to be increasingly unwinnable, and public opinion turning increasingly sour, Nixon made the decision to begin bringing the troops home, and ended US involvement in Vietnam by 1973. 2 years later, the South fell. The Cold War was now taking its toll on both superpowers. In Russia, a huge percentage of the budget was still going to the military. People were still hungry, and they just didn't have access to the same lifestyle and goods as the West. And what did they have to show for it? They weren't even winning the space race anymore. Both sides needed to reduce spending in order to rescue their economies, and so both welcomed with open arms an easing of hostilities, otherwise known as détente. To improve relations,
Détente.
Nixon became the first US president to visit Moscow in 1972, and Brezhnev returned the gesture a year later. A number of treaties were signed, including
I have a theory about the French language. I think it's so difficult that once you learn it, even if you are born in France, then you're just not able to learn any other language. And that's why it's so difficult for any person who is not French to learn this language. I'm telling you, I tried and I failed.
You tried for the total of 5 hours.
Well,
6?
at least 5 days. But,
No, you really
but I failed.
because you're saying that like you don't have a talent for languages, but you do. You just didn't try.
How is your French?
Yeah, I'm not saying I couldn't learn it. I don't know. I downloaded Duolingo and now it displays this very passive aggressive dead owl on my vision, like in a desert, and I'm like,
I've met it too.
Moscow in 1972, and Brezhnev returned the gesture a year later. A number of treaties were signed, including the 1972 SALT agreement that limited nuclear weapons. Relations with China were even improving via ping-pong diplomacy when the US table tennis team went on a tour of the People's Republic. However, internally, China was still pushing anti-capitalist
I was
propaganda,
going to
which
ask
led to
that.
some mixed messages. Nixon even visited China in 1972, and it was a barrel of laughs.
Today, the president walks among priceless treasures from China's golden age. Among them, a pair of ear stoppers used by the emperor to keep from hearing criticism.
Put the stopper into his ears so that he couldn't hear the criticism.
Give me a pair of
他是不是给我一对啊？
Everything was going great for Nixon, until it was uncovered that back home he was being a very naughty boy and violating constitutional protocol. I'm announcing today my resignation as president, and I'm passing the office to my vice president, Gerald Ford. Wow, you mean in America the people can actually remove their leader when he breaks the law? Why not just rule by force? Where's the corruption? And my first act as president is to pardon Nixon. Ah, there it is. After the whole fiasco, Americans decided what they really wanted was just a nice, safe guy who wouldn't cheat on them. So they elected Jimmy Carter, and the two sides met in Vienna where they
think
signed
he's
yet
still
another
alive.
strategic arms
Is it?
limitation treaty. It's an honor,
Oh, yeah.
Premier Brezhnev.
Yes.
Likewise, President Carter. Please don't do that. But that's
I heard he's a pretty nice guy. And I think his wife died recently. I mean, recently, it might be 2 years ago, but I remember reading about it recently. But I read that he builds houses for the poor, he and his wife, and he's like 90-something, like really old man. And he goes to these construction sites and he's still helping.
maybe it's the kiss. It's like the power of life.
They
Who
elected
knows?
Jimmy Carter, and the two sides met in Vienna where they signed yet another strategic arms limitation treaty. It's an honor, Premier Brezhnev. Likewise, President Carter. Please don't do that. But But that's not to say there was no longer any tension between the two sides, because there was. Heaps of it. Once again, the Soviet Union put down further attempts at reform and rebellion in the Eastern Bloc. The Euro missile crisis saw new and improved classes of intermediate-range missiles being deployed in Europe. In 1979, the Soviets thought it would be a good idea if they had their own Vietnam and invaded Afghanistan to prevent a US-sponsored Islamic insurgency. And in response to these various crises, Olympic Games were boycotted. Conservatives were concerned that US policy had become too soft, and in 1980, they decided they wanted a president who would be tough on communism, so they elected Ronald Reagan. And Reagan came in guns blazing. Concerned at the Soviet Union's human rights violations, he made a speech calling them an evil empire. And he also wanted to renew the arms race using technological advances in computing and lasers. He came up with the Space Defense Initiative, also known as Star Wars, which was basically a big defensive anti-nuke shield around the country. But a lot of people thought it was a pretty dumb idea. The Soviet Union perceived this shift in rhetoric as the USA getting ready for war, and they were feeling especially threatened as their relationship with their communist ally China had broken down. Relations took a big hit in 1983 when the Soviets shot down a Korean airliner that had strayed into their airspace, and it looked like the world was going right back to mid-20th century Cold War tension. But then Brezhnev got really old and died, and was replaced by this guy who was really old and died, and was replaced by this guy who was really old and died, and he was replaced by Mikhail Gorbachev. Coming into office in 1985, he was the real game changer. His philosophy differed a lot from previous Soviet leaders. He felt that the reason the Soviet system and economy was struggling was that it didn't allow the Soviet people to find satisfaction in their work, because they weren't allowed to speak freely and lived in fear. Gorbachev wanted the Soviet people to be happy, but unlike previous Soviet leaders, he actually made the change happen. Within the first couple of years, he began the political movement for more openness and transparency, and the restructuring of the Soviet political and economic systems. And change very quickly took effect. People could criticize the government, they could enjoy Western pop culture, the media interviewed Margaret Thatcher, but most importantly, the Soviet people could now enjoy Pizza Hut. All hail to Gorbachev. He also knew that the arms race needed to end in order to rescue the Soviet economy, and a positive relationship with the West must be established. Constructive dialogue reopened and resulted in the INF Treaty, which saw all intermediate-range missiles eliminated, which was huge. Reagan's tone towards the Soviet Union began to soften, and things were looking up. But what would these reforms mean for the Eastern Bloc? For decades, the Soviets had been brutally suppressing any attempt at change. Now, would they be allowed? And that was the exact question on Hungary's lips when the Prime Minister visited Moscow. Gorbachev's response: he didn't necessarily agree with the reforms, but he wouldn't stop them either. He was prepared to let the Eastern Bloc choose its own future. This was massive, and the Hungarian leaders began planning free,
I mean, the leader like that, you would wish that leaders like that to happen more often, and not only for countries like Russia, but for other countries as well. You know, when you are really like trying to make something positive out of the time that you have running a country.
When he started describing how, like, the philosophy, it sounded like the ideal communism, like, you know, like the Machiavellian, I think, the first idea that, like, you are supposed to do what you like, and then you enjoy your job, and then everyone's happy, and then you can speak about it, and you can choose what you do. And that was the very, very old original. I mean, part of it, of course. It sounded good. But how long was he, right? How long was he in the reign?
I'm not sure, because they said that he started in 85, and it's 89 now.
Okay. Oh, we'll find out, I guess.
I think Yeltsin was after him. He was the first president of the Russia Federation. I think it was 91 or 90. But there was, I think it will be later in this video, about Gorbachev losing power because it was kind of complicated.
multi-party elections. Poland followed suit and also held elections in June. The anti-Soviet party Solidarity won 99 out of 100 seats in the Senate. But not just that. In Hungary...
I'm sorry for pausing again, but I think this will make you laugh, because we read, of course, your comments, and some time ago you suggested that we should watch something called Fat Electrician, and we had a couple of comments about that. I think
someone called Fat Electrician, I think.
No.
Like a channel. Yeah? The guys.
Yeah. Wait, I'm going to that.
Okay.
But I just read this comment, and I think I was alone. I wasn't reading this with Weronika, and it was something like, you guys should really watch The Fat Electrician. You know,
okay, I know what you're going to say.
Yeah? And I thought that they meant by the
It was difficult to hold to laughing.
Lech Wałęsa, he was the first president of the post-communist Poland. And he was an electrician by trade, and he was fat.
He still is fat as an electrician.
So I thought, I was like, oh, why all those people from different countries are suggesting that we should watch something of Lech Wałęsa? I know he's kind of famous, he won a Nobel Prize, but I didn't know he's that famous now. But it turns out that...
And known by the fat electrician FA.
But yeah, it turns out that The Fat Electrician is a history channel of some sort. We haven't watched it yet, but I think we will soon.
Yeah, we want to say it.
Sorry, we will continue.
Sorry, I'm just thinking someone saying the Nobel Prize goes to The Fat Electrician. Okay, let's go.
Anti-Soviet party Solidarity won 99 out of 100 seats in the Senate. But not just that. In Hungary, the barbed wire border between East and West was removed. The Iron Curtain was unraveling. But not all Eastern Bloc leaders were happy. Notably, East Germany was still ruled by a hardline Stalinist, Erich Honecker, and many East Germans were still eager to get out. They had been trapped by the Berlin Wall, but now they were doing the math. If they could travel to Hungary, and Hungary's border with the West was loosening, could they now make it to the West? That summer, East Germans decided Hungary was the latest top holiday destination. They traveled there in droves, and using various methods, tens of thousands crossed the border into Austria and the West. Honecker was furious, and blocked travel to Hungary, but that civil liberties train had started rolling, and it wasn't stopping. Thousands more flocked to the West German embassy in Prague, where they stormed the fence around the embassy gardens, and a temporary refugee camp was set up. In September, deals were struck to allow the refugees to travel west via train. Back in East Germany, the people were running on a civil liberties high, and they wanted their next hit. Dissent was growing. Over time, demonstrations turned to mass protest, with plainclothes secret police officers doing their best to put down the dissent, but it had grown well out of their control. And worse, the biggest demonstration was yet to come. We're gonna put all of this down by force. Right, guys? Guys? Unfortunately, everyone had realized what he had not. This was bigger than them, and the entire East German Politburo voted him out of power. On November 4th, over 500,000 East Germans took to the streets of East Berlin. For many, there was still one big target left in their sights. That damn wall. The pressure on the East German government was too great, and on November 9th, they made a bit of a chaos.
I just thought, about living in a capital, because, you watch movies about events like that, like here about the unification of Germany, or about the French Revolution, and, there was this massive gatherings of people, protests, revolutions, but all of it mostly happens in city capitals. And for many people who live somewhere, near the border or far away from the capital, they are like, yeah, they stay like a day, another day. And after a couple of days, they hear news that there was some crazy revolution in their country. And now the whole country is reunited. And the whole world is talking about how German people...
Well, maybe some people travel there to protest as well.
From
around.
Maybe in the 1989, but
yeah, but not for the French Revolution.
Like for the French Revolution, it's just Paris, and the other people, they're like
wall. For many, there was still one big target left in their sights. That damn wall. The pressure on the East German government was too great, and on November 9th, they made a bit of a chaotic announcement that the travel ban between East and West was being lifted. The change wasn't meant to take effect until the next day, and crossing guards still had orders to shoot on sight any who tried to cross. But that night, huge crowds gathered at the crossing points, and the guards were overwhelmed. In an astronomically historic moment, after decades of family separation and travel restriction, the people were allowed to pass through. East and West Berliners couldn't believe it and celebrated together throughout the night. Some even climbed the wall and began to topple it. The Iron Curtain had fallen, and a year later, Germany would be reunited. Elections in Bulgaria, a peaceful revolution in Czechoslovakia, and a violent one in Romania brought to an end communist...
I just wonder, maybe it's kind of cynical of me, but I wonder how this reunification worked for people from the west border of Berlin. Like, for the people from the East, it was definitely improvement of everything, of quality of life, of better jobs, better prospects. But, people like to feel better than their neighbor, it's in their nature. So I wonder if for West Berliners, the readers, they were really like, oh, that's so great, brothers, we haven't seen you so long. Or were they just like, ooh, brother, ooh.
Like in that way?
Maybe not me.
No, I think both at the same time. I guess it depends, but also, all the competition at the workplace. Now you have so many skilled workers coming.
Yeah.
Maybe they didn't have the advanced technology, so they won't know exactly how to operate your machine, but they have education. They're coming. They want to take they're better qualified for some of your positions.
Yes.
And that's not great sometimes for the industry owners, but not for the people who
And you don't have the advantage that they don't know the language.
Yeah, and all of the practicalities, they probably had better doctors' offices. So now everyone would rather go there to the doctor if they have better doctors, better hospitals, but they don't have the capacity for all of that because they developed a little bit more during that time.
Yeah.
Authority in the Eastern Bloc, America decided it would be best if it just stayed away and let the change happen, as the anti-communist movement continued all the way back to Moscow. Gorbachev had given the people the freedom to demonstrate. Now, they demonstrated for an end to the communist single-party rule, and Gorbachev had to give in. For the first time in history, elections were held in which candidates not officially endorsed by the party were allowed to run. Ambitious rival of Gorbachev, Boris Yeltsin, led a growing democratic movement. Now things here get quite confusing, and the dissolution of the Soviet Union is a complicated topic, so believe me, this is oversimplified, but it went a little bit like this. The Soviet Union was made up of a number of smaller Soviet republics, the largest of which was Russia. Yeltsin got himself elected the president of Russia, and began a struggle for sovereignty against Gorbachev and the greater Soviet Union. Communist hardliners were horrified at what Gorbachev was allowing, so they briefly kidnapped him and tried to set up their own emergency government. But Yeltsin and his supporters all gathered around the White House in Moscow and were like, no, we have a tank. So the hardliners had to concede and released Gorbachev. Wow, thanks Boris. That was a close one. No problem. And thanks to you for all the great freedom you've given us. Anytime, pal. And just to inform you, I've used that freedom you've given us to go behind your back and make a deal with Ukraine and Belarus to dissolve the Soviet Union and set up the Russian Federation. In other words, you're no longer in charge. I am. Dude. So uncool. And so decades of tension and the everlasting threat of nuclear war finally came to an end as democratic governments were established in many of the old Soviet republics, and the world got along together forever after.
Yeah, so he was 6 years in power.
Hey, this modern art thing is growing on me. Where can I learn to do that? Skillshare. Skillshare is an online learning community with classes in design.
Yeah, we decided that we are working this, yeah?
Learn how to code your own games and apps. Learn a musical instrument. Learn how to animate videos like mine.
You learn French?
Japanese. Premium membership gives
No,
you unlimited
I learn
access
Japanese,
to all
but
these
not French.
classes and more. And better yet, everything is taught by genuine experts working in their field. Skillshare
I
is
think I
also
had
more
Skillshare
affordable
so
than other
far.
learning platforms,
Yeah?
with an annual subscription being
Sorry.
less than $10 a month. What's that?
I didn't
You wish you had
remember
an
for what.
exclusive
I
deal
think
just
that
for
was when I wanted to learn
oversimplified viewers?
programming.
Well, wish no more, my friend. The first 500
Not that I've
people to
ever
use this
learned
link,
anything.
which can be found in the description below, will get their first 2 months
Do you
for
remember that time?
absolutely free. Plus, you'll be supporting my channel.
Remember when I
and keeping
studied
these
IT?
videos coming. So be sure to use the link in the description box below and learn
You
something
remember
new
when I
today.
studied it?
No.
It happened for 2 years. I just never went to any classes, but
Yeah.
that's how I was getting my discounts.
Okay, yeah, sorry for this digression.
You can cut it out if you want.
I won't. Weronika told me in the last video that I made up 2 English words. I mean, it wasn't the last video, it was one of the recent ones. What was that?
I would never publicly make fun of you.
Go on.
I don't remember.
You don't remember?
One was tendensity, that's for sure.
Okay.
But I don't remember the other one.
Yeah.
I like tendensity though.
It
sounds legit.
Very creative channel. We even make out words. Okay, so that was Cold War Part 2. I'm sorry I'm sorry that it is so long, because I think it's over 33 minutes now. I mean, maybe it will be different when we edit out, but I think it will be over half an hour, so sorry for that. We have a tendency to pause a bit. And we also have some comments about people who are like, oh, you're pausing too much.
Oh, I think that wasn't done in the oversimplified video.
No, but, if you want to watch the whole thing, we encourage you to watch, the original content of the original creator, because, I think that's only fair if you will watch it there. But here, we try to produce a content that is of a different nature, and we don't want to, just stare and add our faces to something that we watch. We also want to, add some comments of our own.
Yeah, we are already using someone else's work, so we want to add some value to it and not just make it so that we can watch the video with us.
Yes,
just
that's
sitting
why I
there,
would
yeah.
just But I think,
Sure, yeah.
I think most of the people understand.
Yeah, I think that's what most people are looking for as well. Yeah, and thank you so much for all the nice comments that you're leaving us. It's so nice of you, really. And for like all the discussions that you're engaging in and all the information that you're giving us. I have been researching a lot that you said. I think I mentioned that when I replied to your comments as well. Very interesting stuff.
And what do you think about this video? Because, I watched it, so you know that. Weronika hasn't, so let's hear what she has to say.
Oh, now you put me on the spot.
Yeah, yes, I did.
No, I like it. I still like it. I know that's very vague to say, but it's really clear in the explanation. I think I like how they also explain how the people in power changed. Like, I knew who Gorbachev was, but only a little bit. I think we mentioned him in the Epic Rap election.
Yeah, he was there. Yeah, but now you can, put him on the timeline.
That's
you
what
know
I
where
want.
he came, when he went.
That's what I wanted from these videos when I started this series, and that's what I'm getting. Not that, okay, I recognize this person, or like I know more or less what happened, but I have the context and I know what came because of what. And even if I'm not gonna remember every American president, because I already don't remember, like after another, who did what or who came, but I'll still remember those names more or less the more we watch, and I understand why things happen. And I think that's the most important, and that's the thing I was missing maybe, because again, like we said, my knowledge comes more from like talking to you or talking to other people, or from movies or from books, less so from school, to like really understand why something happened.
Okay. Alright guys, so that was Oversimplified Cold War Part 2.
Yep.
We will definitely watch some more Oversimplified. I can tell you when we will upload the next episode of this series, but
Good enough.
I think sometime soon.
We also wanted to watch the one that you recommended, the Fallout of the Second World War.
Yeah.
I think we're gonna watch that one too.
Yeah. So again, thank you very much. And as always, please remember to subscribe, give a thumbs up, ring the notifications bell, and some comments. We appreciate them all.
Yeah, thank you very, very much. And see you in the next video, whatever it may be.
Yeah.
Bye.
All right. Goodbye.